So today we will speak about four models of creationism, or not all of them we can call creationism, but this is just models that exist today in this world that claim to be a kind of a creationism models. And the first model, so these are the four models that we will discuss today. The first model is young Earth creationism. The second one is old Earth creationism. And the third one is evolutionary creation. And the fourth one is intelligent design. So we will have these four models that we will discuss today. We spoke a little bit about the intelligent design yesterday, and we will continue to explain it a little bit more. But our first attention and primary attention will be to the three first models: young Earth creationism, old Earth creationism, and evolutionary creationism. Okay, let us start with the discussing the first model, which is called young Earth creationism. Actually, this model is very popular among the conservative scholars, and this is the most traditional model of the creationism. And we as Adventists also share the same position. So we believe in young Earth creationism. Although there are some ideas even inside the Adventism movement where some scholars can argue for the old Earth creationism, but this old Earth creationism is not the same as we will discuss today. So it is a little bit different form of the old Earth creationism, but actually it is mostly young Earth creationism, but we will discuss it later. Okay, so what are the main ideas of the young Earth creationism? We can say that these are several assumptions that are shared by most of the scholars who hold this position, that God created the universe in 6 literal days. So these 6 literal days are 24 hours days. And it happened about 6,000 years ago. Of course, we don't know exactly the date when it happened. That is why we can say it was about 6,000 years ago. Among even Adventist scholars, we can find several people with different opinions about that. But usually those people who believe in young Earth creationism, say that the age of the Earth is about 10,000 years old. To be more precise, not more than 10,000 years old. So it could be less than 10,000. God cursed the whole originally very good creation after and in response to Adam's rebellion. So it is important that this curse happened after the rebellion of Adam, and it was a response to Adam's rebellion. It means that the death came into the world only after the fall. There was no fall before there is no death, sorry, before the fall. The third position, God destroyed the world with a year-long global catastrophic flood at the time of Noah. And the fourth one, he judged mankind at the Tower of Babel, supernaturally dividing the people into different languages and thereby into different people groups. So these are like four main postulates or axioms of the young Earth creationism. So the Earth is very young. It is about 6 or not more than 10,000 years old. So the death came into this world only after the Adam's rebellion, and it was a response. Death was a response to the rebellion of Adam. The flood was a global flood that destroyed all life on the planet. And after that, God is responsible for mixing up languages and dividing people into different groups. That is what the church almost universally believed for the first 1800 years until the early 19th century, when most of the church accepted the idea of millions of years that was developing in geology, which was then followed by Darwin's theory in 1859. So what kind of biblical evidence we can find for young earth creation? First of all, this is the nature of biblical narrative. And this is a very, very important issue, and we will discuss it later, about the genre of the book of Genesis, especially about the genre of Genesis 1:11 and genre of Genesis 1. So is it a historical narrative, or is it some other genre? So if, for example, if it is not a historical narrative, but a kind of parable or a kind of any other metaphor or anything else, so in this case, we cannot believe or we cannot interpret it literally. But if it is a historical narrative, and we believe that it is a historical narrative, and there are some other arguments that can prove that it is a historical narrative, so in this case, we need to understand it literally. And Genesis 1:11 has the same characteristics of historical narrative as other parts of the Bible. Other issue that help us to believe that this is a historical narrative, the early chapters of Genesis name real people, describe real places, and discuss real events in real time. So it means that it is really history. It is not a fiction. It is not something that is made up by the people, but it really took place. Also, the other biblical authors and Jesus treat Genesis 1:11 as literal history. So they do not give us any hint to believe that this account or this passage of Genesis 1:11 is not literal or is somehow could be interpreted differently. Another important issue is that literal day of creation. And young earth creationists believe that every day is a 24 hours day. So it is not an uncertain period of time that could last millions of years. And the Hebrew word for day, yom, is defined in its two literal normal senses. The very first time it is used in the Bible in 1:5, and it could be the light portion of the dark light cycle contrasted with night, and just 24 hours, dark and light cycle. The days are numbered, first, second, third, and so on, and each is preceded by the refrain, and there was evening and there was morning. Every other place in the Old Testament where day or yom is modified by a number, it always means a literal 24-hour day, not any other. So that the days are sequential and not overlapping is clear from the repeated phrase, and God saw, and it was so, and it was good. The repetition is emphatic. God finished the work of one day before the next day started. So all these arguments can be presented as a proof that the days which are used in the first chapter of the book of Genesis are literal days of creation. Also, we know it is very, very famous argument that we as Adventists especially always use, and this is the connection between the fourth commandment and the days of creation. So when God gave the fourth commandment to the people, he connected this commandment to the creation story. For in 6 days, God created the world and everything that is in it. And on the seventh day, he rested. So the first commandment doesn't make sense if the days are not literal. And if this is an uncertain period of time, so the fourth commandment really loses its sense. So a critical passage, this fourth commandment can be considered as a commentary on Genesis 1. God tells the Israelites to work 6 days and rest on the seventh, because he created in 6 days and ceased creating on the seventh. The commandment makes no sense if the days are not literal. And verse 11 stands as an unsurmountable brick wall against any attempt to add millions of years into Genesis 1. They can't be inserted into each of the days, or between the days, or before the days. For the verse says, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. So do you see, all these arguments can be used for the literal day of creation. Also, there are logical problems if we put millions of years into the days or between the days. How could plants survive without animals and insects to pollinate them? Why would God make creatures that lived and died, some kinds becoming extinct for millions of years before he created man, whom he created to rule over all the other creatures he made? So all these arguments, or all those questions, are just directed against the idea that that the days are not literal, but they are longer than the literal days. Also, what we can speak about the order of creation. Not only does the time period of creation in Genesis 1 contradict the time claimed for the evolution of all these things, but the order of creation events in Genesis 1 also contradicts the order of events in the evolutionary story of the universe and of life. For example, in Genesis, the earth was created before light and the sun, moon, and stars, whereas in evolutionary cosmology, most stars were formed before the sun, which gave birth to the earth and moon. A global ocean preceded dry land in Genesis, but in evolutionary geology, the earth started as a molten ball, cooled and developed a dry crust, and then millions of years later, seas formed. In Genesis, we are told that all the land plants were created before any sea creatures, and birds were created before any land animals, all of which is the opposite order of evolution. So we can see that it doesn't make sense to try to reconcile the account of the book of Genesis with the account with the theory of evolution, because even if somebody proves that the days are periods of time and of a certain length, so in this case it doesn't make sense, because the order of creation written in the Bible is different from the order according to the theory of evolution. Yeah, do you have any questions? Okay.
Not yet, Prof.
Okay. And also, we can see that in the Bible, God created supernaturally. He created by his word, and sometimes scholars use the expression fiat creation. So fiat creation is a momentary creation. It is not a creation that lasted a very, very long period of time. And 10 times in Genesis 1, there are some records like, and God said. God created by his word. He spoke and it was done. He created the first animate and inanimate things supernaturally and virtually, instantly. On the day that they were created, they were fully formed and fully functioning. For example, the first plants, animals, and people were created as mature adult forms, not as seed or fertilized eggs or infants. The plants immediately had fruit on their branches, and the animals and people were immediately ready to obey God's command to be fruitful and multiply. So God created supernaturally, and God created almost, we can say, virtually instantly. So because of course we don't know how long it lasted, but anyway, it was not a long period of time. And of course he didn't use any other tools to create. He created everything by his word. How God created is revealed in the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ, who is in the creative word who became flesh. He revealed his glory as the creator in his very first miracle when he instantly and supernaturally turned water into wine. All subsequent miracles were likewise instantaneous results from his spoken word or his touch, not the result of natural processes. Genesis 1 records a week of miracles. Of course, somebody can argue this and can say that sometimes Jesus healed or performed miracles, and those miracles like took time to happen. Like, for example, the blind man from John chapter 9. So you remember he was not healed immediately when God put a special mud on his eyes, but he was healed on the road to the pool of Siloam. Or, for example, so another example when it was not instant. Just forgot. Yes, for example, in the Gospel of Luke, 10 lepers. They were not healed immediately, instantly, but it took time. When they were going to see the priest at that
I'm
moment,
in class.
they were healed.
I put this thing in my ear. That's why.
Brother Mugusu, please.
Oh, he has muted himself already. Okay. But in all these cases, like in the case with the lepers and in the case with the man who was blind, this delay with of the healing evidently was purposeful. So Jesus intentionally did this in order to emphasize some theological ideas, some other thing. Okay, so yes, one more thing that can prove that the Earth is very young are the genealogies in the book of Genesis. And of course, there is a question. Some scholars said that these genealogies are not full, and maybe they have many gaps and lacunas. So these are just the names of the people whom we know or who were recorded in the Bible, but maybe there were many more generations which are forgotten and which are not mentioned in the Bible. So Genesis reveals vital information for how long ago the creation week occurred. Genesis 5 and 11 give us genealogies from Adam to Noah and Noah to Abraham. But unlike all other genealogies in the Bible and in ancient Near East literature, those in Genesis give the age of the patriarchs, when their son were born, and how many years after that birth the patriarch lived. So these chapters give strong evidence of providing a chronology. And this is one more argument why we can say that the Earth actually is young. It is not old. And Adam was created about 2,000 years before Abraham, who, according to most of scholars, was born a little before 2,000 years BC. Okay, this one is also could be arguable and debatable, this statement about the age of Abraham, because there are If you remember, there are two kinds of chronology: long chronology and short chronology. And according to the short chronology, Abraham was born a little bit later, more exactly 215 years later than according to the long chronology. But it looks like, I took it from the book, it is the presentation of Ken Ham. And Ken Ham, it looks like he believed in the long chronology. That is why he says about this date of Abraham. Since Adam was created on the sixth literal day of history, that places the creation of the universe a little more than 6,000 years ago. Yes, this places the creation of the universe a little bit more than 6,000 years ago. Even if Adam was created like 10 or 12,000 years ago, as some young earth creationists suggest, this is still irreconcilable with evolutionary timescale, which dates the first Homo sapiens to 200,000 years ago or earlier. So we can see that those genealogists actually they prove that the Earth should be very young. It shouldn't be very, very long. The pre-fall creation. 6 times in Genesis 1, God says the creation was good. And at the end of the 6th day, he declared everything is very good. This included the fact that both men and the animals and birds were vegetarians. To give us some understanding of what very good means, we should note that the only thing declared not good before the fall was that Adam was alone for a few hours while naming animals before God created Eve. So actually, the idea of this slide is to tell that actually everything that God created before fall was very good. Sometimes some other adherents of other position, they can say it was very good, but it was not perfect. That is why they allow death before the fall. But we don't have anything like this in the Bible. The Bible explicitly says that when God created, everything was really good. There was nothing bad at that time. And of course, the theory of evolution, if we accept it in any form, makes senseless all biblical account. If the death is a natural process and not a result of sin, then there is no sense in redemption and salvation history. So it is just naturally, and nothing can help us and protect us from death. So it is a natural process. But of course, it is not so. So to accept millions of years of animal death, disease, and extinction, as well as earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and tsunami requires a conscious or unconscious rejection or ignoring of the Bible's clear teaching about the very good pre-fall creation, the cosmic impact of the fall on the whole creation, and Christ's full redemptive work in the cosmos. Okay,
Yes, Prof.
So, yes, please.
If we can go back to the previous slide.
Yep.
Yeah, where we are talking about the Adam and Abraham, kind of the years between Abraham and Adam.
Yes.
We are there. First, I would like to know what is the basis of these calculations, or which method? Is there something that we can base and say, yes, this one shows that between this and this is 2,000 years?
Yeah.
The basis or method of arriving to this, is there any formula?
Just a minute, please. So can you see it?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, this is the so-called long chronology. And the long chronology, there are two verses. But it seems to me I talked with you about this, but I don't remember. I just want to remind you about that. So the long chronology is based on the book of Exodus, chapter 12 and verse 40. And this verse says that the people of Israel, the sons of Israel, spent in Egypt 430 years. So it implies that from the moment when Jacob and his family went down to Egypt until the Exodus, 430 years, there were 430 years. But according to the short chronology, and it is based on Galatians 3:17, according to the short chronology, Paul says that between the law, so between the promise and the law, 430 years, there were 430 years. So when he speaks about the promise, he means the promise of Abraham in the chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, when he was 75 years old, and the Mount Sinai. So now, if we take a long chronology, and most probably the author, the Ken Ham believes in the long chronology. So what we have in 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse 1, it says that the temple started to be built 479 years after the Exodus. So in this case, we know that the Exodus took place in 1445 BC. If we add 430 years, so we will have Jacob and his family came down to Egypt. And we can calculate in the Bible, this is period of time of 215 years between call of Abraham and when Jacob came to Egypt. So it means that call of Abraham took place in 2090 years before Christ. So it means that Abraham was born in 2165 years before Christ, or like this, something like this. But if we take the short chronology, so and based on the verse of the Apostle Paul, we have the call of Abraham a little bit later. So, and it means that Abraham was born in 1950 before Christ. So we also add 479 years from building of the temple to the Exodus, and 430 years before call of Abraham and Exodus. So before promise and the giving of the law. So is it clear?
No, I understand up to how the 430. You have mentioned if we go the short chronology, it means Abraham was born about 19 something before Christ.
Yes, 1950 before Christ. So
Okay,
we need to add 75 years.
And he was 75 years.
Mm-hmm.
We are basing it on the year when he was called. How old he was when he was called?
75 years old according to Genesis 12.
Okay. Okay, so that is what is taking us to 19 something there.
Yes. And yes, I took it from the Ken Ham presentation, and Ken Ham actually, most probably he shares the views of, he stands on the position of the long chronology. So that is why he says that Abraham was born in the third millennium. Yeah. Let me go back.
Okay. It's clear, Prof.
Yes. Here, yeah. So he says Adam was created about 2,000 years before Abraham. Yeah, who according to most scholars was born a little before 2,000 years before Christ. Yes, but here this is also one more problem, and this is a textology problem. So do you remember when we spoke about textology of the Old Testament? I don't remember it, but it seems to me I talked to you about the difference in the Septuagint and the Masoretic text. Do you remember? The Septuagint gives about 1,000 years more between Abraham and Adam. So according to the Septuagint, it would be not 2,000 years, but it will be like 3,000 years, even more than 3,000 years. Okay, but we can speak about it a little bit later, just for you to remember. So that is why we cannot be sure about the exact age of Earth. And my personal conviction is that God on purpose didn't reveal the time when the world was created. Or this information is not clear, and we cannot be sure about when. So we cannot count all the years from our time to the creation of the world. Even though you know that Jewish people today, they have their own calendar and they count years since the creation of the world. But almost everybody knows now that actually there is a mistake in their calculation, and we cannot rely upon their calculation of years.
Yes, Prof.
Yes.
Yeah, there's this question that comes whenever we treat the issue of 6 literal days creation.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I believe in the young earth creation.
Okay.
But there is this question of what was before God said, "Let there be light," before God parted the waters into the rivers and sea section, and the land was revealed. So, was matter in existence before God began to
The week of creation.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Because when the waters were parted to create space between the waters above and waters beneath, was those things there and were those things there and were just covered by waters?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
I hope you understand the
yes.
issue I'm raising.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So this is an important issue, and this issue became a kind of controversy. Especially, do you remember, about 7 years ago, we had a quarterly on creation, a Sabbath School quarterly on creation. And during this Sabbath School quarterly, there was this idea was introduced. And according to this idea, there was a gap between verse 2 and between verse 3. So it looks like the first two verses describe the state of the earth before the week of creation.
Yes.
So this is the what you want to ask, yes?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, and this idea is supported by most of Adventist scholars, especially in the United States, and especially in Andrews. And if you read, for example, this Jack Ducan's commentary on the book of Genesis, he shares the same position. And I will explain it to you a little bit later. This position or this theory got a name, a passive gap theory. Passive gap theory. So do you see, yesterday we mentioned active gap theory, or hypothesis. And I told you that today almost nobody shares this idea about the gap between verse 1 and between verse 2. But this idea was introduced in the Bible, in Scofield's Bible, and because the Bible became very, very popular, so this idea also became very, very popular. So the passive gap theory is, yes, it is very, very, it is very popular in among the evangelicals as well. And for example, John Collins also shares the same idea. He is not an Adventist, but he also subscribed to the same idea, and some others as well. And actually, this idea is based on the syntax of the Hebrew text. And next week, when we start doing the exegesis of the book of Genesis, of the first chapters, we can spend more time, because I don't want now to speak about this, because we need now to open the Greek, the Hebrew Bible, and to try to see the syntax in the Hebrew Bible. So let's discuss it next week, and I will explain why most of our Adventist theologians believe in this idea. Okay.
Okay, Prof.
So now, do you have any more questions?
I don't know whether it is related to what my brother has asked, but I'll be glad to know how to bridge this gap. Most people say that this in the beginning, that this in the beginning is not known when. So in the beginning could be long time ago. In the beginning in Genesis 1 could be long time ago, even million and millions of years ago.
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know how we can bridge that, especially when we are talking of the young Earth creation.
Yes. That is why I told you. That is why I told you that even among the Adventist theologians, there are some people who can say that Earth actually is old. The Earth is old. Yes.
Yeah.
And because of this passive gap theory, we can accommodate this old Earth. But anyway, our Adventist theologians, we believe that the week of creation started about 6,000 years ago. Okay. So we cannot accommodate evolution.
Okay.
We can just say that there was a gap, and gap allows Earth to be old, but not the week of creation. So it doesn't mean that the week of creation started many, many years ago. And yes, that is why we need to talk about this, and we need to clarify all those issues, and that, for example, you can explain it to others. And next week, when we will start discussing, especially the first chapter of the book of Genesis, you will see that it's very difficult to interpret it, because there are so many ideas how to understand even the first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what does it mean actually? And there are many, many ideas about that. How to interpret even the first verse of the Bible. And our task is to try to understand all these things and to have our own position, but maybe it will be not always possible to make our own position. Sometimes we can have like several equal possibilities how we can interpret this or that text. Okay. Yes.
I'm glad we are trying to find out a sensible understanding of the reasons behind this young earth creation. But will we take time also to look at the reasons behind the evolutionists, why they think the way they think? Because they're avoiding an evidence that is documented in the Bible, and yet what they're saying is simply an hypothesis, a creation. Do they have any logical, reasonable, or grounded reasons why they have to think of man evolving?
We talked about it yesterday. We talked about this yesterday. And actually, what you can see, and what I tried to show to you, that actually this is not the invention only of Charles Darwin, but those ideas circulated long before him. He is credited for the creating this theory only because he was able to put everything together and to explain the mechanism of the evolution. So what was the most important? To explain the mechanism, how the evolution is working. And the presupposition of Darwin, and not only of Darwin, but of many others people of that time, was very clear. So they, first of all, they didn't believe in God, I think, because it's impossible to create some kind of issues if you don't believe in God. And they didn't believe in God for many reasons. Like one of them that Darwin explained in the letter that I cannot explain for himself, he says, the cruelty in the world. I cannot explain how is it possible that God created like such cruel things or beings in this world. So this is the problem of theodicy. Theodicy is very, very important, and it was important especially at that time, that people cannot explain it otherwise. So the theory of evolution was for them kind of answer to their questions. If we speak about the world that is just survives, the survival of the fittest, the natural selection, then the cruelty is in this world, so we cannot avoid it. And of course, also, as I explained to you, what moved Darwin to speak about the descent of man or origin of man is his observation of how he believed primitive people that he saw in some of the islands, and according to him, as he believes, that those people are not very far or not are very similar to the monkeys in the zoo. But of course, it's terrible to believe like this, because even today, when we speak about the image of God, we can understand that every creature, every man is created into the image of God. And there is a big gap between image of God and all the animals. So animals are not created in the image of God, but man is created in the image of God. And but of course, all those issues, yes, I always say that, do you see, a monkey has like 2 legs, two hands, so it looks like a man, but it is not an image of God. It is not an image of God, but we are the image of God. So all these things accumulated together led them to this conclusion, that there was a natural selection, the survival of fittest, and finally there was an evolution. I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yes, Prof. Yes, Prof.
Okay, so now let us make a break for 10 minutes and we will come back at 15:17. Okay?
Thank you, Prof. I was really pressed.
Mhm.
Back to school.
Okay.
Prof, I'm not hearing any voice. Are you presenting already? Hello, are you presenting already?
The class has not started, Pastor Gimbo.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Brother Olados, you need to mute.
Hello, Pastor Gimbo.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing fine.
How is Nigeria and everyone?
Dear, everyone is, will I say fine, or we are trying to cope?
Yeah. Okay, we wish you the best.
Yeah. How is the family?
They're surviving.
Yeah, excuse me for being late after the break. So let us continue. Yes. So let us continue this presentation. So we said that everything was good. So there was no death. There was no any bad things before the fall. And we also said that theory of evolution makes senseless all biblical accounts. If we accept millions of years of animal death, disease, and extinction, as well as earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunami, it requires unconscious rejection or ignoring of the Bible's clear teaching about the very good pre-fall creation. And many other things also came to the question. For example, if death is not a result of sin, so in this case, why shall we need redemption if it is just a natural event? So, and many other things that comes to this issue. So Noah's flood, the earth, the young earth creationism also states that the flood was a historical and global event. There are many passages in scripture that attest that the flood really happened. There are many references also in the Bible. They say that Noah was a historical person, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Peter, also in his first and second epistle, affirms that only 8 people were saved from the flood, and the flood was very historical. And also the judgment on Sodom was very historical. And Jesus himself also said that the flood is historical, and he connected the flood with the second coming of Christ. And people who reject the historicity of the flood have difficulty finding plausible interpretation of those verses. So if there is no flood, or it was not a global flood, so how can we explain what Jesus and Apostle says, and also the people of the Old Testament said about flood? So the flood was not a localized flood in the Mesopotamian Valley or of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, as many Christians suppose. Scripture could hardly be clearer. The purpose of the flood was to destroy not only sinful human beings, but all the land animals and birds, not in the ark and on the surface of the earth itself. But all the land animals and birds. Okay, only a global flood would accomplish that. So The scripture really says that the flood was global. And in Genesis 9, God promises to Noah and his descendants, the animals and birds and their offsprings, and to the earth itself, that he will never again destroy the world with a flood. If the flood was local, God lied, for since that time, many local floods have destroyed some people, animals, and parts of the earth. Note also that Peter linked the formation of the earth out of water during creation and the destruction of the earth by water during the flood to the global and universal impact of the coming judgment. So do you have any questions? Okay. Yes, and the origin of fossils. Young creationists believe that the global flood was responsible for the origin of fossils. So it is not a product of evolution or a long period of activity of the people and animals, but everything happened during the flood. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by waters all over the earth. All the continents are covered with the sedimentary rock layers containing billions of fossils, and we find marine creatures on the top of our highest mountains, including Mount Everest. So everything speaks about the global flood. Okay, so we just finished the young earth creationism. I think that this part is very easy for us because do you see, actually we share the same position or almost the same position, and actually all those arguments, we don't need to be convinced in all those arguments. All those arguments are very appealing to us and very clear. And now we come to the second theory, or second model of creationism. And it has two names. Actually, it is called Old Earth creationism or progressive creationism. So this is already a kind of an attempt to reconcile the theory of evolution and the Bible, the account of the Bible. And it is called Old Earth creationism or progressive creationism. So let us also try to understand what are the main presuppositions of this point of view, of this model of origin of the world. The adherents of this position usually share many of the conservative presupposition of understanding the Bible. So, for example, they also say that the Bible is God's infallible word and inerrant. So it means that everything that is written in the Bible is true, and they stand on this position. The scripture is of supreme authority for obtaining the truth. So they also believe that scripture is trustworthy, and we should accept scripture very seriously. They also believe that Genesis 1:11 communicates a literal historical truth. And Genesis 1 clearly describes a chronology of supernatural events that occurred in history. They also believe that the creation days are sequential and not overlapping, because there are some ideas when they speak about the days or something, and we will speak about it a little bit later, when the days of creation are not sequential. So the days are overlapping. For example, like the day 4 and day 1, they could be like started at the same period of time, and or day 4 could precede day 1 when the lights, sun and moon were created, or something like this. But the old earth creationists believe that the creation days are sequential and not overlapping. But it doesn't mean that they believe that they are literal days. Scientific evidence overwhelmingly confirms the literal truth of Genesis 1:11. Okay, so now this is the main presupposition, and we can see that actually we can share, we can agree with this main presupposition. But let us look a little bit further to let us see how they understand the creation. Progressive creationism accepts much of what science shows about the universe development, including the idea that most of the development proceeded according to natural laws. With respect to other things, however, especially life on Earth, progressive creationists believe God intervened directly at crucial points. All of this creation taking place over millions of years. Okay, so do you see the difference? What they say, they believe that the Bible is really truth, and what is written in the Bible is truth, but they do not deny the scientific position about how the world originated. So the only thing, so actually what they believe, that God actually used evolution as a tool for creation, and he just intervened in a special period of time and pushed evolution to the new level. So let us see how they explain it. The surface of earth waters in Genesis 1:2 as the frame of reference for the 6 creation days narrative. The Hebrew poetry and imagery convey explicit truth about creation history. For example, Job says, God wrapped the sea, in the thick darkness, making the clouds its garments. Job affirms here an opaque primordial atmosphere, not the sun's non-existence, caused darkness over the surface of the deep. So this is a very, very famous point of view, and it is shared by many representatives of this position, that actually what is described in what happened in day 4 is not really a creation of sun and moon, but the sun and moon was created long before, for example, the week of creation. But because the surface of earth waters was the earth was covered by the waters, so in this case the sun was not, and moon and the stars were not visible. And what God did on the 4th day, he just made all the celestial bodies visible for the people. And yes. Okay. An integration of Genesis, Job, and Psalms leads to a belief that Earth's atmosphere was opaque before day 1, became translucent on day 1. So that is why light appeared, and we can speak about the creation of light. So the light began to be visible on day 1. And on day 4, it became transparent. So it means that the sun and all other celestial bodies became visible. But for the people who just, if they were present on the earth, it would be like creation of sun and all celestial bodies. This sequence aligns with the life's needs. Earth first life needs a light for photosynthesis. The animals created after day 4 need lights in the sky as signs to regulate their complex biological clocks. The text reaffirms that God made the sun, moon, and the stars. So according to this approach, what are they going to do is just to interpret what the Bible says in a different way. As it is written here, so everything appeared when it was needed. Like, for example, the plants were created on the on the third day. It was the creation of plants. And the plants were created on the third day, and they need light for photosynthesis. That is why light was created before the plants were created. And animals need day and night. They need it for their complex biological cycle. So that is why stars and celestial bodies were created on the fourth day before the animals. And also Genesis 1, chapter 1 and 2 sentence structure implies time passed between the initial creation event and the formless and void earth of the formless and void earth, and between the primordial earth and the first creation day. So they also speak about the gap theory and the gap that took place between verse 2 and verse 3. And no, time passed between the initial creation event and between 1 and 2. Between initial creation event and the formless and void earth, and between the primordial earth and the first creation. Between verse 2 and 3. So they say about the gap, and it also can give some more years to the age of the earth. And the main problem is how can we explain the existence of death during all those millions or billions of years. As Genesis 3:17 states, cursed is the ground because of you. Humanity changed, not the physical laws God established in the beginning. The laws of nature were designed from the outset to serve God's redemptive purpose and plan, put into effect before the beginning of time. So what they want to say, actually everything, the laws of nature were the same from the very beginning. So God created the laws, and those laws were not changed even after the fall. The humanity changed, but not the physical laws, according to this position. Young Earth creationists believe that Exodus 20:11 is an unsurmountable brick wall for old Earth creationism, perhaps because the English text says 4 in 6 days. However, the Hebrew text says for 6 days, Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, and uses the verb asa, made, fashioned, not bara, create. God is portrayed as a divine craftsman. Exodus 20:11 is stating that God fashions the universe, earth, and life throughout their histories. So let us explain it a little bit more. So actually, what they want to say, they just try to interpret it literally, because there is no in 6 days. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, because of 6 of days God created. So in this case, we cannot, it looks like we cannot say that it was done in 6 days. But of course, it involves some ideas about the syntax, and we can speak about this verse a little bit more later on. Young Earth creationists ask a question: why God would wait millions of years between his creation acts? However, Job and Psalms provide an answer. God's plan was to pack Earth with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, for as long as possible, given unchanging physical laws. So we humans would have the resources, biodeposits necessary to fulfill the Great Commission in a relatively brief time window. So this is just, as for me, is a very weak argument. And according to this argument, they say that actually God permits these millions of years between his creation acts in order that we have enough natural resources and everything prepared in order to fulfill the Great Commission. But of course, we can also say that God could create everything with resources, with everything. So he, as I told you yesterday, sometimes people just imagine God very small, very little. So he was not able to do everything. The earth already packed with all those natural resources. It is true that God's creation miracles occurred instantaneously, but it doesn't mean they occurred nearly simultaneously. From the text and nature's record, a picture emerges of countless instantaneous miracles across billions of years. So they want to say that actually, yes, God, they say that God created in a moment. He could create in a moment, but it doesn't mean that everything was finished in 6 days. But as I said, the main idea is that God used evolution as a tool for creation. So it means God started this mechanism of evolution, and in certain periods of time, for example, when evolution is not able to do it by itself, God pushed it, for example, when there was a need to make a new species of animals or a new kind of plant, or so when animals from the water should go to the life from the water should go to the dry land. So in all those particular moments, God intervened and pushed the evolution. And so the young earth creationists insist on the completeness of Genesis 5 and 11. So this is about the chronology. However, the careful reading of the original Hebrew text reveals that neither genealogy is exhaustive. So they say, on the contrary, that in fact we cannot be sure that genealogy of Genesis 5 and 11 are complete. So there could be some gaps or some more names which are not mentioned there. And in this case, we have much longer period of time, but nobody knows how long it is supposed to be. And the Hebrew word yom does not necessarily mean only 24 hours day, but also could mean a longer period of time. And actually, it is a very, very controversial statement because we can make an exegesis and we can see under what conditions the word yom is not 24 hours, but more. And also what they say, and this is one of the most important arguments for the adherence of this position. So the science, they based their point of view on science. And science proves that our Earth is actually very, very old. The observable spectra of distant stars and galaxies attest to past constancy. So the idea is that in the past, this is one of the main presupposition of this theory, that physical laws didn't change in time. So they were the same for many, 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 many years, for billions of years. And they want to prove it by the fact that, for example, the light that coming to our planet from other distant worlds is it means that actually comes in time. For example, we need like billions of years before a light from very distant galaxies can come to our planet. So in this case, it means that billions of years ago, this galaxy already existed, and it means that actually the past is constant. There is no any kind of new creation that started only 6,000 years ago. On Earth, physicists measure xenon isotope ratios, showing that plutonium was present on the early Earth, decaying at the same rate as it does today in nuclear reactors. A natural, now spent nuclear reactor in Gabon dates back to a time when uranium-235 had not yet decayed to its current low level. So I just gave you one link here to this very interesting fact. And one scholar, one scientist actually predicted that such kind of natural nuclear reactor could exist. And he predicted some of the conditions that stipulate the existence of such kind of reactor. And about 20 years after his prediction, French scientist in Gabon, because Gabon was, it used to be a colony of France. So they mined for French nuclear nuclear plants. They mined uranium, and what they discovered was really very, very interesting. They discovered uranium mine in Gabon, but it didn't have the same number of uranium that it is predicted. So it was like a scandal because it looks like 200 or even 2,000 kilograms of uranium ore was missing. And when they started to study this phenomenon, they actually said that it is a natural nuclear reactor. So it looks like a nuclear reaction was going on under the natural conditions. And that is why they can explain the absence of uranium ore, not uranium ore, but it is not as saturated with uranium as it is supposed to be. So, and according to the scientists, it proves that the Earth actually is very, very old because they measure how many uranium left, and according to the time of decaying of the uranium, the rate of decaying of uranium, they can calculate the age of this reactor. So you can just look at the video, or you can just Google it to see, to know more about this reactor. Also, one more very interesting discovery they found that Antarctica actually, do you see this is a continent with almost completely under the ice, so very, very cold place of the Earth. And they can see the layers of ice, and by those layers of ice they can understand how old is the Earth. The cores reveal 8 cycles of the 100,000 years variations in the eccentricity of Earth orbit. Sediment cores provide a continuous record of Earth orbital cycles over the past 3 and 9 million years. The sheer quantity of Earth biodeposits indicates life has existed on Earth at near maximum possible abundance for at least several hundred million years. And this is also one of the arguments that they use, and they discovered it in the Antarctica special place, Dome C, and in this place they found these many layers of ice, and according to those layers of ice, they can say about this 8 cycles of 100,000 years variation. So, and everything proves that the Earth is actually very old, according to them. Okay, so do you have any questions about this idea, about this theory?
Yeah, Prof.
Yes.
Yeah, my question borders on the duration of the Yom day. Is it biblically proved that it is 24 hours period, or are there other time durations captured as Yom?
Okay. So what you can do, and I think it is a very nice exercise for all of us, just to make our own research on this issue. Okay, so for example, what we can do for this, we can just find all the occurrences of the term Yom in the Bible, and we can see when this term means more than 1 day period of time. Okay, and I will tell you, just immediately tell you that when the term Yom is in singular, it always refers to the 24 hours period of time when it is singular. When it is plural, so it can mean longer period of time than 24 hours. Like, for example, do you see, even when we studied eschatology, we spoke about the expression in the last days. Yes. So days,
Yes,
in
yes,
this case,
yes.
it is not 1 day, but it is clear because it is plural. So it is just another way how to make a longer period of time. Or, for example, when Elkanah, do you remember in the first book of Samuel, when Elkanah brought a sacrifice every year for his 2 wives? In the original text, when we read, so in our translation, it is usually translated as a yearly sacrifice, or sacrifice that he brought every year, and it is clear from the context. But when we read the original text, it will be a sacrifice of the days. Okay, sacrifice of the days, and days again is in plural. So what conclusion can we do? We can do this conclusion that when a Yom is used in singular, so like 99% of occurrences, or even more, so we can say that even 100% of occurrences in the Hebrew Bible, it speaks, or this term means just a simple day, 24 hours day.
Okay, Prof. Okay,
But
Prof.
if it is in plural, so it can mean a longer period of time. But it never occurs in the sense of billions of years.
Okay, Prof. Then, secondly, how do young Earth creationists relate to the issue of other planets in our solar system.
Uh-huh. Yes, yes. There is a nice question that you ask, okay? And the question is, of course, the universe, we cannot say that the universe was created in 6 days. Yes?
Okay.
Evidently, something had existed before God started the week of creation.
On the earth.
And in this case, there is a question. So as I told you, how can we interpret the first statement of the Bible? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So some scholars, for example, Bruce Wildcat, argues that this expression, heavens and the earth, actually means everything. And he says that this is a merism. So you know what merism is. Merism is a literary device when a whole is presented as two opposites. Like, for example, if we speak the young and the old, so it means everybody.
Everybody.
Yes. Or we can speak the day and night. Okay?
Yes.
It means like also all the time.
All the time.
And yes, so in this case, Eretz, Hashamayim v'ha'aretz also could mean, it could mean everything. So in this case, we can interpret the first phrase of the book of Genesis as God created everything in the beginning. And after that, he started creation of the formation of the earth and making it more, making a shape and inhabited the earth with the living creatures. So this is the big question. So my position, so how I can understand, so I can explain it for myself. On the fourth day, it says that God actually created the sun, okay, it is not stated the sun, but the big light and the small light for day and for night. And it is clear that the sun and the moon were created, and also the stars. And of course, I cannot be dogmatic in this case, but how I can explain it, that our galaxy, Milky Way,
yes,
created on this day. So when it's stated that he created all the stars, so actually what we can see with the unaided eye, usually what we can see is only the stars of our galaxy, of the Milky Way. And we cannot see all other galaxies, but all other galaxies also existed, and they had existed before the day of creation. So I think that God could create all our galaxy, everything that around us.
Prof.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I was looking at the accordance.
Okay.
And I'm seeing an impression that even the translation we are saying in the beginning may not necessarily be, the article is not there. It's actually supplied. It's in a beginning.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe we go in that when we enter next week, like you said.
Yes.
If
So
it
this is,
can suggest
yes. There is a room for another
say,
translation of this statement. So there is a room for translating it as a construct state. For example, in the beginning of creation of the heaven and earth, like this. And in this case, we don't need article in the word Bereshit because it is a construct chain, and in the construct chain, the word in a construct state actually cannot take an article. And the article, if you want to make the construct chain to be a definite, so the article should be before the word in an absolute state. And the word Hashamayim, Ha Elohim, Ha Elohim, it has article. So in this case, it could be created Bereshit in the beginning of God's creation, like this. So there is a room for this interpretation and for this translation. And let us speak about this next week.
So when I was looking at that, what I was commenting about, it gives us a big opportunity to talk about many things. So I think we should rather stick to what we are discussing now and avoid making definite ends like all the whole universe, one earth being created, and perhaps when you highlight us further, we can be able to see how we can understand this particular section of the verse.
Okay, let us come back to this issue next week, because I believe it is very important for us to understand all possible ways how can we translate it. And by the way, I would like also to refer you to the book of John Collins, Genesis 1:4, Genesis 1-4. And in his book, actually, he tries to consider all the possible variants of the translation of this phrase in the beginning. Actually, he stands on the traditional position. So he tries to understand it as we usually understand in the beginning, God created. But there are some other ways how we can do this. Okay, thank you for your comments. And any other questions or any other comments? Okay, if no questions, so we can move to one more theory. So, and this is evolutionary creation, or this theory is very, very close to the theistic evolution. Actually, the title is different, the name is different, but the nature of the theory is actually the same. And also what they want to do, they want to just make a different accent. Because if we speak about the theistic evolution, the main word in this phrase is evolution, but it is theistic evolution. But as the representatives of this theory say, the evolutionary creation, the main word is creation. So they want to make an emphasis on creation. But the idea is very similar to theistic evolution. And actually, it is also very similar to the progressive creationism or old earth creationism. So all those theories just different from each other only in the degree of God's participation in the creation. And now we can see that we are moving to the less degree of God's participation in creation. For example, if the old earth creationism says that everything was actually created by God and God only intervened, God pushed evolution. So here we can see that they have another presupposition. So let us discuss the main assumptions or main presuppositions of this theory. Evolutionary creation claims that the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit created the universe and life through an ordained, sustained, and designed reflecting evolutionary process. Okay, so actually they say that it was God's plan to use evolution for creation. This view of origins fully embraces both the religious beliefs of biblical Christianity and the scientific theories of cosmological, geological, and biological evolution. It contends that the Creator established and maintains the law of nature, including the mechanism of the teleological evolution. In other words, evolution is a planned and purpose-driven natural process. So this is just the main assumption of the evolutionary creation. So God used evolution from the very beginning, and it was his plan to use it in order to create everything. So the difference between theistic evolution and evolutionary creation. Theistic evolution places the process of evolution as the primary term and makes the creator secondary as merely a qualifying adjective. And evolutionary creation states that the world is a creation that is absolutely dependent for every instant of its existence on the will and grace of the creator. The qualifying word in this category is adjective evolutionary, indicated simply the method through which the Lord made the cosmos and living organism. But this is, as for me, only the different term or different name, but the essence or nature of this theory is the same. So how can they explain this point of view? And they use a kind of metaphor. And they say there are remarkable parallels between evolution and human embryological development in the womb. Evolutionary creationists argue that God's action in the creation of each person individually is similar to his activity in the origin of the universe and life collectively. So why do they say about the parallels between evolution and human embryological development? So do you see if when we consider the stages of the development of an embryo in the womb, so it starts like one cell. This cell later on is divided, and after that it is like so the baby in the womb is still in the waters. So everything resembles the evolutionary process when everything started with one cell, and one cell started to divide or to grow and to divide on many others, and after that some new organism appeared. And they say that actually this is the same process. So the process is very similar, but the origin of man, or not origin, but when the man is born, so in this case it is the same as the process of evolution, only in a very short period of time in the life, or in the life of one person. And they say that no Christian believes that while in his or her mother's womb, the Lord came out of heaven and dramatically intervened to attach a nose, set an eye, or bore an ear canal. Rather, everyone understands embryological development to be an uninterrupted natural process that God subtly maintains during pregnancy. In the same way, evolutionary creationists assert that dramatic divine interventions were not employed in the creation of the cosmos and living organisms, including people. So, do you understand? So they use this very interesting metaphor. Okay, so if God doesn't intervene in the process of the development of a child in the womb of the mother, so in the same way, God didn't intervene in the process of evolution. He just started everything, and everything was developing according to the natural laws. Men and women are utterly unique and distinguished from the rest of creation because they are the only creatures who bear the image of God, and they are the only ones who have fallen into sin. Christians throughout the ages have debated where, when, and how these spiritual realities are manifested in the development of each individual. Yet history reveals that the Church has not come to a consensus on these questions, leading to the conclusion that these issues are beyond human understanding. In other words, they are mysteries. Similarly, evolutionary creationists believe that the manifestation of God's image and the entrance of sin into the world during human evolution are also a mystery. So in this case, do you see one of the biggest problem for evolutionary creation is how to explain all those doctrines like the fall of the people, like historical Adam and Eve, and some other issues, death before the fall. And so how can all these things could be explained? And actually they try to interpret it somehow, and we will see the examples of the interpretation of those things, and we will try to understand how they think and how they try to support their position. So, but mostly what they say, it is a kind of a mystery, so we cannot explain it. We cannot explain what does it mean fall. We cannot explain what does it mean to be the image of God. It is a kind of mystery. So they try to avoid the interpretation of these issues. Now, the important thing is how they interpret Genesis 1:11. The Holy Spirit inspired the biblical authors at a specific point in ancient history, using their language, literary conventions, and ideas, including their conception of the natural world. The ancient intellectual categories of the inspired writers were not set aside, but employed in the process of biblical revelation. There is some science in the Bible, but it is the science of the day, a few thousand years ago in the ancient Near East. Genesis 1:11 is a unique type of literature, and modern Christians should learn not to read their modern assumptions, expectations, or agendas into Genesis 1:11. So it looks like this argument makes sense, but to what degree it makes sense. So the idea is that God actually used a conventional language. So it means that he spoke to the people of ancient times at their level. For example, they had their own worldview about the universe, and God didn't destroy their worldview, although it was wrong. So he spoke to them on their baby language in order to explain those issues. For example, for a long period of time, there was an idea that Earth is flat. The word Earth appeared over 2,500 times in the Old Testament. It's in Hebrew, it's Eretz, and 250 times in the New Testament. Never once is this word referred to as spherical or round. Instead, the universe in the scripture is compared to a tent with the earth as its floor. So it looks like they believe and they want to argue that actually God spoke to people at their language. So if they believe that the earth is flat, he didn't reassure them that it is not so, but actually when we read the Bible, there is an impression that really that Bible supports the idea of the flat earth. Another example is the earth is immovable. The Bible records 3 times that the world is firmly established, it cannot move. The stability of the earth is understood to be like that of a building set on the solid foundations. The biblical writers frequently refer to this solid base as the foundations of earth. For example, God set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. So in this case, we can see that also God used the people's understanding. So for people of antiquity, it was very difficult to imagine that our earth actually is moving, and it moves very, very fast, like 30 kilometers per second. This is the speed of rotation of our earth around the sun. So for that reasons, God didn't destroy the understanding of the ancient people, and in the ancient people in the scriptures we can find those statements that the earth is firm, that it is firmly established, and it never moves. But we know that it is not true. So they say that they use this phenomenological language. So the language of how people understood the phenomena of their days, and God didn't want to reassure them. So it was a expression of how they perceived the world outside, a phenomenological language. And one more example: the sun moves across the sky. So of course we know that it is not it is not like this, but in the Bible we can find many examples when the sun is moving, created and placed in the firmament on the fourth day of the creation. The daily movement of sun is found in King Solomon observation. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hurries to the place where it rises. It also appears in the psalmist's praise. The sun rises at one end of heavens and makes its circuit to the other. So it looks like the sun is moving, and it is also phenomenological language, how the ancient people perceived a different phenomena. God could have chosen to explain to the Israelites that their physical picture was mistaken, that the sky is actually a gaseous atmosphere covering a spherical earth. Instead, God chose a better approach. He accommodated his message to their understanding in order to make the intended message very clear. As John Calvin describes it, God accommodates himself to our humble capacities, even speaking in baby talk so that we can understand. Okay, and now important idea is the purpose of Genesis 1. So why the Genesis 1 was written? And Genesis 1 deliberately uses concepts that the first readers would understand rather than the modern scientific picture. And this shows that the intent of Genesis 1 was not to address the how and when questions we ask in modern science. These were not a major concern in a post-scientific. These were not a major concern in a pre-scientific era. Instead, the biblical text focuses on the who and why of creation. Two principles: searching for natural mechanism in the physical world and celebrating the God of the Bible as the creator and designer of those mechanisms. So how everything was created through natural mechanism in the physical world. And these two principles of evolutionary creation is to find those natural mechanisms and to acknowledge God as the creator and the designer of those mechanisms. And of course, the adherents or proponents of this theory, they also like the proponents of the previous theory, old earth creationism or progressive creationism. They use some of the scientific evidences for the old earth and for the some discoveries that say about the long period of time of existence of our Earth. For example, annual layers is actually very similar to the to what we already discussed in the previous one. So annual layers show us that actually the deposits lasted for many years. For example, it's also in Antarctica, Taylor Valley in Antarctica. Buried alpine glacier ice was discovered 2 decades ago in McMurdo Dry Valley, a predominantly ice-free region, roughly the size of Rhode Island. The buried glacier is allegedly the oldest on Earth, with an age of more than 8 million years. That would be almost 10 times older than ice currently being caught from the Antarctic ice sheets. So do you see, they use the same actual arguments about the scientific discoveries that tells us about a long period of time of existence of our world. Or another one is radiometric dating. Sometimes of atoms are radioactive and decay over time. This time period is called the half-life, the amount of time it takes for half of the original substance to decay. For example, the half-life of potassium-40 is 1.3 billion years. During this time, half of the potassium-40 atoms decay into argon-40. Scientists can measure the ratio of potassium-40 and argon-40 in a rock and calculate the time when that rock first solidified from molten lava. A rock formation in Greenland has been dated to 3.6 billion years old, a date confirmed with several different radioactive elements in the same rocks. Rocks returned from the moon have been dated to 4.5 billion years old. So again, we can see that everything speaks according to the scientific data to many billion of years. And very similar argument, astronomical evidence, like light takes many years to travel. We can see galaxies with the same spiral shape that looks hundreds of times smaller than Andromeda, showing that they are hundreds of times farther away. Light from those distant galaxies takes billions of years to reach us. The universe must be at least this old. So, and one more argument, scientific argument of this theory is expansion rate. So, of course, they believe in the Big Bang theory, when everything started from a very condensed state, and it was a Big Bang or explosion of this matter, very concentrated matter, and from this explosion, our universe was born. And the universe is, it is clear that the universe is expanding, and they can measure it through Doppler shift, and they can see that the galaxy is moving apart from one another. If we imagine rewinding the timeline of the universe, at earlier times, the galaxies must have been much closer together. How long has it been since all of the material was packed together at the beginning? And they just tried to calculate, and they came to the figures like almost 14 billion years. This is the age of the universe. So all these issues speak about the long period of times. So how they explain evolution? Evolutionary creationists accept that natural selection and other evolutionary mechanisms acting over a long period of time eventually result in major changes in body structures. Some people call this macroevolution over a very long time. All species on Earth arose through gradual change and are related by a tree of common ancestry. So now I would like to emphasize the difference between this evolutionary creation and progressive creationism or old earth creationism. So old earth creationism believes that actually God was responsible for creating new species. For example, it was impossible for more lower animal to go to the next level by itself. So evolution, macroevolution cannot do this. So they said that God just pushed evolution, and when there was a need to create a new species or a new kind of animals or plants, God did it. So that is why they say that God is responsible for the creation. But evolutionary creation says, no, 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 everything was developed by itself. God just started the process and everything was developing by itself. And they say it is clear that everything developed from itself because we have like common ancestors. So we come from the same ground. And they just gave an example of the evolution of the whale. The series of fossils was found spanning about 10 million years, showing clear signs of increasing adaptation to life in water. So actually dolphins and whales were a big enigma for Darwin, because do you see, according to the evolution, life started in water, and from water it moved to the dry land. But dolphins and whales are mammals, so they are animals, and it looks like evolution went to a different direction. So some animals, they came from water to a dry land, and after a while, they returned back to the water. So it's like an opposite to the evolution. And they actually found that there are some species that they tried to find this chain of adaptation of life from living on the dry land, adaptation to life in the water. So they claim that they found all or most of all those forms from a mammal who lives on the dry land to the one who lives in the water. But of course, it is very, very debatable. And of course, one of the
Professor,
yes, please.
I wanted to make an interjection and ask, when we look at the evolution, if I understood it well, according to the description, is that God sets the creation aspect in motion and it continues on its own. My question was, how do they understand? Does God have an intervention in the midst of the progress, or it is completely out of it for
So
it
it
to
depends
go
on
to
the
the
model.
expected end?
Yes, in the old Earth creationism or progressive creationism,
Yes.
God
Yes.
is involved into the creation. So he just he started the process of evolution. He used it as a tool, but he intervenes in certain period of times.
Okay.
For example,
Okay.
one of the problems of the evolution, as I told you, is origin of new species, because this is it's almost impossible. It's just impossible for like a fish to start living on the ground, on the dry land. So progressive creationism says that at one period of time, when fishes developed very well, and there was a time to create a new species that could live on the earth, God intervened and did this. This is the progressive creationism. But evolutionary creation says, no, 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 no. Everything, God just started the process and everything was developing by itself without God's intervention. And actually, a Roman Catholic Church stands on the position of the theistic evolution. And if you remember, it seems to me I mentioned to you yesterday that John Paul II in 1996 or 95, I don't remember now exactly, he issued a document and he said that actually the Roman Catholic Church accept the position that of evolution, that everything evolved, but the only thing that they do not agree with is that God created the soul. So they say that the body of people developed through evolution, but the soul was created by God. This is a kind of compromise, yes. And actually, do you see, even if the Roman Catholic Church accepts it, so it means that many others also accept the same position. Okay.
Yes, I thank you, Prof. I think also there is a confusion with adaptability, the ability for humans and creatures to adapt to strange environments. And I think there's also that confusion in my view, because when you get to a new environment, there's a way the body and the system adapts to bring on board new features that will help you to cope, for example. Like here in Africa, there are certain areas where it's too hot and the body texture of the people that live there takes on a completely darker kind of frame. And yet others who live in the more cold environment take on, the body tends to put on a different kind of pigment. So I think there's also that element of border where there's adaptability vis-a-vis what they want to call evolution, the progressive movement.
So do you see
that is higher?
There is a difference between macroevolution and microevolution. And we need to understand this. And we believe that microevolution really takes place, so we can see it. But we don't believe in macroevolution. And actually, this is especially important when we speak about the genetics, because genetics actually prove that even our body can adapt to a new strange environment. But it doesn't mean that this adaptation can be transferred to our children, because it should be written in DNA in order to be transferred to the children. And in this case, it's almost impossible. So usually when DNA changes, it doesn't change in the side of improvement. But how DNA can be changed is because of mutation, and the mutation in most of the cases are not positive, but negative. But of course, it is a kind of scientific discussion, and maybe it is not our, we shall not maybe speak about this in our class, because I'm not a scientist. I cannot speak. I cannot speak about that with authority. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. The reason I raised it is because even in the theological circles, it tends to, I was in the science world a bit, but it tends to be the appealing factor, because it's a bit logical that there are changes and adaptabilities.
Okay.
And so the evolution is strong in that direction. So some people may lean on that to make their later theological arguments as well, that could lead them to accept the evolution. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really true. So, okay, so one of the most important questions is about human origin. Of all aspects of evolution, human origin raises the most questions of a biblical interpretation and Christian theology. Archaeology studies of indigenous human cultures show that the first Homo sapiens left Africa. Of course, it is just debatable, but anyway, they believe that the origin of life took place in Africa, and after that it spread all around the world. So the first Homo sapiens left Africa around 100,000 years ago and has spread all over the world by 10,000 years ago. The exact timeline of human migration is still being investigated, but it is clearly inconsistent with the first modern humans living only in the Middle East 6,000 years ago. So this is about how people originated in the world. And genetics strongly confirms the prediction that humans share common ancestry with great apes and with all life on Earth. Here is one striking example. Chimpanzees have 24 pairs of chromosomes, while humans have just 23. If humans share a common ancestor with other great apes, evolution predicts that two chromosomes fused in the line descending to humans, but didn't fuse in the line descending to chimps. So this is how they explain the origin of human. The other result is that humans, like other animal species, emerged as a population rather than as two individuals. While modern humans have a lot of similarities across our population, we have much more variation than could arise from only two people. The early Homo sapiens population was several thousand individuals, living about 200,000 years ago. So they speak about, if it is an evolution, so it is impossible to speak about like only one Adam and one Eve. So they speak that those changes took place in the population of many first Homo sapiens. So when they, we cannot speak about only two people, but there were many. They speak about like several thousand of first people who lived many years ago and who have this change of the number of chromosomes. And now there is a question, so how can we interpret the biblical text? For example, the Bible says about Adam and Eve, so how can we interpret it? And there are several options how they can try to go around this statement. For example, they say that the scientific evidence doesn't rule out the historicity of Adam and Eve. It only rules them out as sole progenitors. Adam and Eve could have been historical, real people living in a real place. It's just the other humans would have been living at the same time. This may resolve some long-standing challenges in the Genesis 4 text, which refers to other people who do not seem to be descendants from Adam and Eve, including those in cities and Cain's wife. So do you see how they explain it? So one of the explanation is, one of the possible explanation for them is that Adam and Eve could be historical figures, so they do not deny it. But it doesn't mean that they were the only people at that time. So maybe they were just one of the representatives of many people. But of course, it poses many other questions. So if only Adam and Eve have sinned, how can we explain the consequences of the sin that was spread all around the world? So even on those people who it looks like they didn't sin. And many other questions that there is no positive answer. And we see one very famous people, like for example, John Stott, suggest that God entered into special relationship with the pair of ancient representatives of humanity about 200,000 years ago in Africa. In this view, Genesis retells this historical event using cultural terms that the Hebrews in the ancient Near East could understand. Okay, they again say about the conventional language that is used in order to convey this kind of story or this kind of truth. So it looks like they were historical Adam and Eve, but it doesn't mean that they were the only people. Or for example, other Christians, including Alistair McGrath, have suggested a non-historical model. In this view, Adam and Eve were not historical figures, and the early chapters of Genesis are symbolic stories in the genre of other ancient Near East literature. They convey important inspired theological truth about God and humanity, but the texts are not historical in the sense people today use the word, or in the way that the Gospel of Luke was written based on eyewitness report of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. So what he wants to say is just a symbolical narrative, and we cannot interpret it literally. So it's a kind of parable or a kind of story that symbolizes something, but we cannot understand it as historical narrative. And of course, there are some problems with the explanation of the key doctrines like image of God, original sin, death before the fall, and how they explain it. Well, for example, image of God. The doctrine derives from Genesis 1:26, in which God creates humanity in his image. Traditionally, this doctrine has been tied closely to the miraculous creation of humans, so that many find it hard to reconcile the Imago Dei with the idea of humans sharing a common ancestor with chimpanzees. However, everything depends on how one understands what Imago Dei means. For example, some theologians see the Imago Dei as primarily about human abilities, such as intelligence, language, and rationality, particularly those abilities that make us distinct from animals. Science is giving new information about aspects of these abilities in animals, showing that these precursors are consistent with evolutionary models, while also showing how the abilities in humans are at distinctly higher levels. So in this case, we can say that this image of God doesn't rule out option of evolution. So this image of God actually could mean some abilities of people that is distinct from the abilities of animals. Or other theologians see the image Dei as primarily about our spiritual capacities and our relationship with God, and still other theologians see it as primarily about our commission to represent God's kingdom on earth, referring to the ancient Near East practices where kings set up statues, images for themselves around their country to represent their rule. None of these doctrinal theories require the miraculous creation of humans. So do you see how they try to avoid or how they try to go around all those doctrines? Or about, for example, original sin. For some theological traditions, original sin is the most challenging question raised by evolution. Romans 3:23 and many other passages teach the core doctrine: all people are sinners and no one is righteous apart from Christ's redeeming work. This is central to the gospel, but precisely what happened historically when sin entered the world and when it happened and why God permitted it are doctrinal theories that have been debated by theologians for centuries. So again, they try to avoid any interpretations. Some theologians read Paul as referring to Adam as an archetype figure. The story of the fall in Genesis 3 involves some symbolic elements, a talking snake, miraculous trees, that suggest to some biblical scholars that it may not be literal history in the modern sense. What is important is that sin is the rebellion against God. Genesis 3 teaches about that using symbolism. So they try to avoid these kind of issues. Or for example, death before the fall. The records of fossils in God's creation clearly shows that many animals died before humans appeared. How does this long history of death square with passages such as Genesis 2:3 and Romans 5:12, which describe death as the punishment for human sinfulness? First, note that neither passage mentions animal death, but refers directly to human death. Second, these passages could be speaking primarily of spiritual death rather than physical death. In Genesis 2:17, God says, "In that day that you eat from it, you will surely die." Yet the immediate consequence for Adam and Eve was not physical death, but a curse and ejection from God's presence. So do you see they try to play with these things, and actually they try to accommodate both views into the evolutionary creation. Okay, any questions about that?
Professor, mine were answered because I also had issues on the sin element. Because in evolution, it appears it's a progressive development. And so you would expect moving from good to better to best, maybe if you moved in that direction. So the question of sin is a challenging one in the pattern if you move by that argument. So I think you have answered in part for the queries I had about their theory, especially in that line. That's where I find them wanting myself in their advancement.
So what is the question? How can we explain the sin?
No, I was asking, that was my question, but you have elaborated on what they believe, because I think it remains a dilemma.
Of course, of course.
They can't explain. They can't explain because their trajectory is moving towards a more advanced species in the creation process. And yet you have seen, which is more a retrogressive aspect. So there is no reconciliation when you look at the theory.
No. So all the attempts to explain actually doesn't explain anything. And we cannot.
Does not, yes.
Yes. It just, it poses more and more questions and without answer, positive answer. So that is why actually all of these theories do not explain anything.
Now, Professor, before we move, I see you are moving to a different theory.
Pardon?
I don't know whether Kajura is pointing out something on this one. I wanted to take you back briefly before you move to another theory, if it was okay. There was that aspect of the genealogy that you talked about in the old earth, progressive creation, where they premised the argument that there are gaps in the genealogy of Genesis 5 and 6. And I was looking at the genealogy. I don't see, for example, Cain and Abel, and someone might wonder, probably there are other omissions to that effect. I don't know what our response could be in that regard. Could someone be right if, say, there were selective choices of a particular element to emphasize maybe a particular lineage of righteousness or something, but it did not capture in entirety some...
To explain, because do you see, actually the genealogy in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, for example, doesn't imply any gap, because there is a sequence from father to son, from father to son. And it's very difficult to insert any number of generations between father and son, because it's clearly stated Adam was the father of Seth. Seth was the father of Enosh, so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to say that this genealogy is selective genealogy, and not everybody is included in this genealogy. But it is also true, for example, that when we have a genealogy in the Gospel of Matthew, this genealogy is selective, because some of the kings are missing in this genealogy, some of the names. So maybe because of that, he said that many genealogies are not complete, but they imply some kind of
Yeah, your earlier point, I think, has been helpful. The father to son, I think if you follow that, it correctly can be able to give us a sequential flow
Yeah,
can
of
help.
course, they can also assume, but do you see, it's very difficult because it gives you the number of years he lived before the firstborn was born. And do you see, sometimes we can say that father doesn't mean only the father. It could be any kind of ancestor. Like, for example, Jesus is son of David, but of course he is not immediate son of David. He is just David was his ancestor very, very long time ago. And so, but in this genealogy in Genesis 5 and 11, it is clearly stated the number of years. The number of years are present. So in this case, we cannot say that there was any gap between those generations. Otherwise, it would not make sense to include these records about the years.
Professor.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor.
My question is about the evolution.
Yeah.
What is their take on life after a human being has developed? Everything stops there, or they have also a future plan like the Bible gives us, especially after this life? Do they talk anything of that nature?
The pure evolution, yes. They don't speak about anything after the death because they don't believe in God at all. So humanity is developing and it is going to somewhere, but nobody knows where. So it is just like a blind process and nobody directs this process. But if you speak about the progressive creationism or evolutionary creation, in this case, they believe that some kind of afterlife exists. And they try to reconcile what the Bible teaches and what the science says. And because science says about evolution, so they try to accommodate evolution into the biblical teaching, so they can find some arguments for this. But it depends on the people, so they believe maybe that after the death, person like soul is immortal and something like that. And of course, they also, many of them believe in the second coming. So when God started this process, God should put it to the end in some period of time.
Okay, then which type of evolution was Darwin?
Which type of evolution was what?
Darwin subscribed the two.
Oh, no, Darwin was a classical evolution, so he didn't believe in God. So he just rejected the idea of God. So it was just a scientific evolution.
Okay.
Hello, Prof.
Yes.
Some people say that Darwin was a scientist, but at some point he became a theologian. How true is this?
No. As far as I know, he never accepted the idea of God. So until his death, he stood on the position of rejecting God.
Okay.
So I heard about something, but it seems to me it's not true. And I remember but it was a long time ago, I read one very, very nice book, but it was not in English. It was in Russian language. And in that book, there was a section on Darwin. And actually that book showed that all the premises of evolution are wrong. So actually there is nothing really true in the evolution. And it is like a convention, and it looks like scientists today, they don't want to accept the idea of God, the idea of creation. So that is why they still hold the idea of evolution. But this theory of evolution has so many weaknesses, so it is very difficult to put everything together and to say that it is a reliable theory. Okay, so if you don't have any more questions, I would like to speak today. So we have only one theory, intelligent design, and I don't know how many slides, it's not too many slides, but probably let us leave it for tomorrow. And tomorrow, I would like you to be prepared for the tomorrow class, because our task for tomorrow is discuss, now we discuss all those theories, and we saw the weaknesses of those theories, that actually those theories doesn't explain everything, and every attempt to reconcile evolution with the biblical teaching actually destroys the biblical teaching, and it destroys the image of God, and destroys many other issues in theology. So all those attempts are actually very weak, and we cannot subscribe to them. And tomorrow I would like to speak to you about another important issue, about the ancient Near East background, because there is a very popular tendency, and this tendency is still popular, also not very much, but anyway. There is a tendency to believe that actually biblical account of origin, biblical account of creation was borrowed from other cosmologies. And what I would like you to do I would like you to make like a homework, so that you try to read and to understand some of the ancient Near East stories about the creation and about the flood, because all those stories are very closely related in the Bible, and we can see that they are also related in the ancient Near East literature. And I would like you to know in general, all the, not all, we cannot know all, but at least the main, most important epics that speak about creation and about the flood. This means these are Enuma Elish. This is quite a long epic, and I don't want you have to know just the general story about Enuma Elish, and especially I would like you, not only for our class and for you as PhD, so it doesn't make sense only to read the summary of those theories, but I would like you to find the text, of course, the translation, English translation of those stories, and try to read the original. Of course, it is not in original language, but at least not the secondary literature, but the primary source, the source of the text of Enuma Elish, Atrahasis epic, Gilgamesh epic. And Gilgamesh epic, we will be not very much interested in the stories of Gilgamesh, but especially the description of the flood in Gilgamesh epic. Just a minute, please. And also Baal Ugaritic stories of creation, and Egyptian stories of creation. So would it be difficult for you until tomorrow to be acquainted with all these stories of creation?
You said we read them in the articles that you posted?
Not compulsory the articles, so you can find some discussion on them in the articles, but also I would like you to know at least the content of those stories.
Okay.
Okay, so let us do like this. Let us divide today ourselves. So we can, each one of us can take one of the stories. For example, who would like to take Enuma Elish?
I
will take
Okay,
it, Prof.
Pastor Bioma. Enuma Elish. So for tomorrow, your task is make a brief summary of the Enuma Elish story, Enuma Elish epic, and especially some elements which are common between Enuma Elish and the biblical account of creation. Okay?
Okay, Prof.
Okay, so we have Enuma Elish, Atrahasis epic.
I can take that, Oladusu.
Okay, Aladosu, Pastor Aladosu will take Atrahasis epic.
All right, sir.
Okay, Gilgamesh epic.
Let me take it, Ogembo.
Okay, Pastor Ogembo, Gilgamesh epic. Okay, very well. So now we have Ugaritic epics.
I will look at that, Prof.
Okay, Pastor Nicholas, I would like you to do Egyptian story of creation.
Oh, okay, it's fine.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
So the Egyptian stories of creation is more, not more difficult, but there are 4 different traditions that they have, and the text maybe it will be more difficult to get the text. So you can do as much as you can, but you can find some articles on comparison. As far as I know, one article is written in Bibliotheca Sacra journal, comparison between biblical account and Egyptian stories of creation, because some people claim that there are more similarities between Egyptian story and biblical story than between ancient Near East or Sumerian, Akkadian stories and biblical stories. Okay, so we also have Ugaritic stories. Pastor Kajura. Okay, you will take Ugaritic, Baal, and how Baal created the world. And Pastor Nathan, what else he made?
Sorry?
So we have one more option for you.
Okay.
And there is it's actually a very short story. Enki and Ninma. Enki and Ninma.
Enki and
Ninma. I will give you just the reference to this.
Okay.
So you can just read it.
Yes, Prof.
Just a minute, please. Oh, sorry, but okay. So I posted the reference I post on our chat. So this is the reference for Enki and Ninma.
Oh, it is gone. Let me
check it from the chat.
Is it possible to send it direct to my email?
Okay, I can.
Because here I see the chat comes and disappears. So maybe after the class it will disappear.
Yeah, after the class everything will disappear. So just
yeah, I'll appreciate if you send it to my email.
So this is Nathan. So I send it. So you have it.
Prof, what about mine?
Oh, you chose Ugaritic.
Yes.
There is a book on Ugaritic mythology, so you can use it, and you can also find some articles on that. And also, what I would like you to do, try to find the text of the epic, so that you not just rely upon the secondary literature, but you can discuss it with the primary source.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Prof, just for clarity, what is the major task to compare these stories with the creation story of the Bible?
Yes, just two tasks. Okay. First one is just shortly, briefly describe this story, and the second one is to compare it with the biblical account.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's clear, Prof.
So that we can proceed tomorrow, that we can be prepared for tomorrow class, and we will see how it will work and how we can compare them and see the differences, and of course see the similarities, and of course see the differences. And it's very interesting to see how ancient people understood the creation and everything related to that. Okay, so any other questions?